Here we are on the morning of Epiphany, January 6th, and you see I've lit my 5 candles in the Advent wreath, and here's odds and ends, the last of my violet creams from my sister, some candy canes and one of my Christmas cards, and I'm going to walk you through this very last piece of the Christmas time. So here's my table that was the main Christmas table for my celebrations, had my Advent wreath on it, and presents and cards and things, and now it's kind of returning to its status as my workstation. But you'll notice that here I have something a little bit new. It's called an Epiphany plate. Now, if you look at this plate carefully, you'll see it's got little tokens on it, things that were part of Christmas at one point or another. It's got some cheese and crackers, and they had Christmas Eve. It's got a little bit of Christmas pudding with a little bit of cream, a sausage roll, the very last of the violet creams that my sister sent me, a couple of dates, a couple of chocolate stars. It's meant to be a microcosm of the entire Christmas season, from Advent through to Epiphany. Just the things that remind you of what you did over the entire season, which is not just the 12 days of Christmas, but it's the 4+ weeks of Advent as well, so you're talking about almost a month and a half. But we're saying farewell on Epiphany, and I want to remind you that Epiphany is the day after 12th day or 12th night. The 12th day of Christmas is January 5th, so do your sums. If you start on December 25th and count 1, 2, 3, 4, you get to January 5th. January 6th is kind of the capstone. And that's when we take down the decorations. So I've mostly taken them down. Some of them are still kicking around, little bits and pieces. And I'll get round to it, and I'll get my place back in order at some point. But for now, the Epiphany plate sort of represents that not grand finale, petite finale. And then I have to put everything away and start thinking about Carnival. And let's talk about that next. So it's time to put away the images of cooking and food that I've been presenting you for several weeks now. And you can see that I've spruced myself up a little bit to celebrate the small turning of the seasons from Christmas and Epiphany into the Carnival season. And I want to start this process by reflecting back on something that I talked about in several earlier videos, namely that Christmas and Easter are really seamless. You move from one to the other without a break or pause, but there is a change. And so the first way I want to think about this is to think about whether you live your life in terms of abrupt, punctuated cliffs, if you like, up to Christmas, off the cliff, up to New Year's, off the cliff, and so on, or whether you're life is more smoothly up and down and up and down. And I'm an advocate of the latter. And so I want to talk about how that works in relation to the joining together of Christmas and Easter, and how we can think about it in those gradations and not in terms of, oh, here's a big event, boom, fall, another big event, boom, fall. And I think we can address this in a few different ways, but I want to start with a couple of favorite poets of mine, T.S. Eliot and Robert Herrick. Now I'll begin in reverse order with Robert Herrick. Robert Herrick was a clergyman and also a poet who was born in the late 16th century, but mostly known as a 17th century poet who was quite popular in his day, and then by the 18th into the 19th century he was mostly forgotten, and then kind of rediscovered towards the end of the 19th and early 20th centuries. You might, particularly if you remember the Carpe Diem scene from Dead Poets Society, remember it begins with Robin Williams asking one of the students to recite, "Gather ye rosebuds while ye may." That's Robert Herrick. And what Herrick is saying in that poem is, don't look to the future for your happiness and success. Do it now, because one of these days you're going to die and you might regret what you didn't do. Well, he also wrote a poem which was not particularly distinguished in his day, although it was, I guess, well enough known, and was eventually set to music in the 20th century, rather unfortunately, I think, called Celebrations of Candlemas Eve. Now, at one time, certainly in Herrick's day, that is in the 17th century, Candlemas Day, which is February 2nd, was actually considered to be the end of the Christmas period and the start of the journey towards Lent. And in the poem he says, and if I can remember it, he says, "Down with the rosemaries and bays, down with the mistletoe. Instead of holly, now upraise the greener box for show. The holly hitherto did sway, let box now domineer, until the dancing Easter Eve or Easter Day appear." Now, what he's essentially saying is, okay, Christmas is over, holly and mistletoe and all those wonderful decorations of the house were fine for the Christmas season, but it's over. And we've got new things. We've got box, which is a different kind of bush. And then he goes on to say, then we've got flowers, we've got rushes, we've got all kinds of things. So the year is made up of different seasons with different symbols. And at the end he says, "Thus times do shift, each thing its time doth hold. New things succeed as former things grow old." So enjoy the things that are here now, but don't lament them when they pass. Pick up new things. It's a wonderful image. The deeper message comes from The Journey of the Magi by T.S. Eliot. And it's a long and, well, it's not very long, but long enough poem and complicated. But the very end of the poem, which I will paraphrase because I've never remembered it, is very important here. Eliot says, when they came to the manger and so forth, "What did we witness? did we witness birth or did we witness death? And one of the things that he's implying is that they're in some sense entangled with each other, that the birth of Jesus entails his death, just as the birth of every person entails their death. And so we need at some level to recognize that they are both always with us. But what we can do, going back to Herrick a little bit, but also continuing with Eliot, is to say, well, if we treat it as just punctuated things, like birth, hooray, let's have a party, everything's great, and then go about our business. And death, okay, let's have a funeral, and let's mourn and weep, and let's go about our business. Let's think more in terms of flow. Let's think how birth flows into death, but death flows into birth, and how everything comes in cycles. And let's recognize those cycles, and let's do them to the best of our ability, but not abruptly. Let's do everything gradually. So now we're shifting. We're shifting from Epiphany, the arrival of the Magi, and Eliot's poem, of course. And let's start thinking about our journey towards death, our journey towards the crucifixion. But let's also remember that the crucifixion is not the end. That Easter comes after, which is about life. So what's Carnival about? Well, Carnival is leading us to Lent. It's leading us to Ash Wednesday. And the day before Ash Wednesday is called various things: Shrove Tuesday, Mardi Gras, number of things. And that's the last hurrah of the carnival season. Carnival literally means, from Latin, take away meat. And I suspect that in my next video I'm going to talk about how the word carnival comes to mean take away meat. We know that Lent is the time when people historically, particularly in the Catholic Church, didn't eat meat. Nowadays it's a little bit fuzzier, and a lot of Protestant churches don't even do anything like that. But more importantly, I want to talk about that root carne and what it means in all kinds of words, like carnation, carnelian, incarnation, carnival, carnivore. They're all related. That's another linguistic distraction or detour that I'll take next time. So the carnival season is a season leading up to the day before Ash Wednesday, when you're going to put on ashes and be penitent and leave your meat behind. The day before that, you're going to have one final splurge. In England they call it Pancake Day, because we make special pancakes with lemon and sugar, and I'm going to talk you through that on Pancake Day. But the whole carnival season leading up to Mardi Gras is one of joy, of celebration, of exuberance. And there are many cultures where it's a big deal. I've lived in many, or visited many. They're pretty much all Catholic towns, cities, locations. Venice, for example, New Orleans, Buenos Aires. They all have their own special traditions. Rio, everyone knows about Carnival in Rio. Goes on for weeks and weeks and weeks. This year it's not going to be terribly long, because Ash Wednesday falls on February 17th. So it doesn't give us a whole lot of time, but it gives us some. In Buenos Aires they have what's called the Murgos, which is a series of parades that are performed every Saturday and Sunday from now until Ash Wednesday, and they're all based on the local sections of Buenos Aires, and they're quite distinct. New Orleans, probably you all know about. There's plenty of foods associated with Carnival. I'll get into that also at some point. But what we're doing is we're smoothing our transition from the birth towards the Lenten season, when we're going to dip down. Now, the main point I want to make about the ritual cycle is that it's a way of separating things that, if we muddle them all together, confuses us intellectually, spiritually, emotionally, in all kinds of ways. Like, yes, death is always with us. Birth is always with us. But what the ritual cycle does is it says, let's just pull those threads apart and let's examine them separately. See, Eliot is saying, we got to the manger and I was all confused. I didn't know whether I was experiencing birth or death. In my life, I'm all confused. But what the ritual cycle of Christmas and Easter is saying is, yes, we're always all confused, but let's just take birth and death and pull them apart. And for a time, let's just enjoy birth. And then for another time, let us lament death. But let's just try to keep them separate so that we can truly experience joy at the point of birth and truly experience grief at the time of death, and not have them all jumbled together. Unfortunately, this leads me back to my own work on Genesis. And one of the things that I say about the creation story in the book of Genesis, chapter 1, is that it's all about keeping things separate. That on the first day of creation, God looks at the waters and the darkness and says, okay, what are we going to do about this? I've got an idea. Let there be light. And there was light. But it doesn't end the day there, because there's light and there's darkness. So before he ends the day, he separates the light and the darkness. He doesn't say, well, the light's all good and the dark's all bad, any more than you can say the day is all good and the night is all bad. He says they've got to be kept separate, so that during the day you celebrate the light, and at night you can celebrate the darkness. That separation, in fact, if you take the classical Hebrew word for separate, kadosh, it means holy. That you become holy by keeping things apart and not mixing them, because if you mix them, it's a muddle, and you're confused, the world's confused, everything's chaos. So Christmas, Advent, Christmas, Epiphany, Carnival, Ash Wednesday, Lent, Easter, all the way to Pentecost, is saying, yes, these things are all very important. And we need them all, but we're going to keep them separate so that we can really focus our minds, our spirits, our emotions on each one in its turn. So that's That's my New Year's message for you. For now, I will return to this subject over and over as we move towards Lent and into the Easter season. But for now, if you like my videos, please tell your friends, please like and subscribe, and I will see you next time for a little discussion of meat.